Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cross Examination. Today, I'm joined by a best-selling and award-winning author who writes about everything from serial killers to near-future technology. But I know that that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg there, Steve. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your books and what else you do?
Okay, sure, great. Yeah, no, it's good to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And over the years, I've written a number of different genres of books, from young adult fantasy to science fiction to thriller, suspense, psychological mysteries, and crime, police procedurals, and I've also written books on how to teach stories and storytelling, especially to little kids. My master's degree is actually in storytelling. And so before I ever started writing novels, I was a children's entertainer, and I would travel around and tell stories to children at libraries, churches, and schools, and so on. And so I've written I've written books on how to tell Bible stories to preschool children, and I write serial killer novels. So my wife says it's kind of like inviting Stephen King over to do a puppet show for your kindergarten class. So that's kind of what's going on in my mind. So, but it's all about telling great stories that really engage your audience, your listeners, whoever that might be. If it's kids, clearly I'll tell different types of stories, than if I were writing a thriller for adults. But it's fun to be able to try to entertain people through the medium of telling a good story. Yesterday I went to a library and told children's stories for about an hour in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, at the Pigeon Forge Public Library. And man, it was so fun to see, even during this pandemic, like kids, we sat outside, and of course, kids were scattered and social distance and so on. But just to be able to say, look, I'm going to tell these kids a bunch of children's stories, see them laughing and just enjoying themselves. It's like, that's a privilege to be able to be in an industry, as a storyteller, right? To be able to bring joy and pleasure to people through the stories we tell. And so it's always encouraging for me to be able to get out there and do live, programs and presentations, and I appreciate your chance to share a little bit about some of the stories that I tell here on the show today.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something I love about you is your passion for stories and something that I think we both share. Were you an early, just this off the cuff here? What were you like as a kid with stories and things? Were you like the kid? Because I'll tell you a little bit about, like, when I was a kid. I remember having a calendar up on my wall, and things were marked on, of course, start of school, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But other things that were marked on there, I remember, like, movie release dates. It was, this movie comes out this day and this kind of, and I every weekend I conned my parents into going to a movie. So I'm curious, what were you like as a kid with all that?
Man, I love storytelling. My uncle, actually, whenever I was a kid, we would get together with them for Christmas or New Year's, Thanksgiving, and so on. And typically at Thanksgiving, the guys, we would go hunting, women would go shopping, everybody come back together, from my family and my extended family, and have a big ham dinner at Thanksgiving. For some reason, it was ham instead of turkey. But then afterwards, my uncle would get this look in his eye, and he'd take the kids to a corner of the room, and he said, "I'm going to tell you a story." And so he would tell us his stories, and we would be transported, and we were no longer in the living room. We were in the middle of the Sahara Desert, flying over on a flying carpet, or swashbuckling with pirates out in the Caribbean, or staring down a grizzly bear up in Alaska or something. But we were transported to another world. And so I fell in love with this idea of storytelling. And so as I grew, I really read a lot of stories, and especially science fiction and horror, fantasy is kind of what I grew up reading the most of. And then started just falling in love with short stories, short fiction, with like a twist at the end. I always loved those stories so much. And when I started to write stories about about 15 years ago, I ended up saying to myself, well, you like thrillers, you like twists, you like all of these. Why don't you try to write what you enjoy to read? And so I remember also reading a book that I didn't think was very good. And I was so mad that it was a bestseller that I threw it against the wall at the other end of the room. And I was like, I can write a better thriller than that. And so then there's this voice in my head saying, oh, yeah, prove it if you're so smart. So then I was like, all right, I guess I got to do it. So I sat down to write my first novel back in 2005. The Pawn was my first thriller. And so for me, I've always just loved to engage with the imagination, step into this new realm, tell stories that have twists and then suspense and tension and then interesting dilemmas. But I would say I grew up falling in love with stories as a kid, listening to my uncle tell stories when I was growing up.
Yeah, that's very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. So you also have a podcast that you get into a lot of this, talking about stories with storytellers from all over the world.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Story Blender?
Yeah, it's it's called the Story Blender. It's at thestoryblender.com, or of course on iTunes and Spotify and so on. It's at the Story Blender. And so basically our tagline is great storytellers share the secrets to great storytelling. And so we have authors, we have storytellers, comedians, screenwriters. And as we were chatting about before, I was like, I can't believe you haven't been on the show. Like, I thought I had you on years ago. And so I'll have to have you on the Story Blender for sure. And you can talk to me about writing dark crime novels and where those stories come from. But yeah, the whole goal is really to have to explore this dynamic, this idea of how do we tell great stories and what lies at the heart of a story well told, whether it's on film, whether it's an orally, spoken story, or maybe it's on print page. And it's so fascinating actually, because from all these realms, like I think over the last 5 years, I've probably done about 100, 150 interviews with some of the leading storytellers in the world. And the same kind of things keep coming up. Emotional resonance with your audience, right? Writing a story with your audience in mind. So instead of just saying, I'm going to write this story or this book or make this movie, or think about who is your readership, who is your audience, and how do you shape a story with them in mind? And then, the third thing really that seems to be all across the board is touching on sort of these universal human needs and desires, like the desire to love and be loved, to find a way, or adventure, security, or maybe the idea of finding forgiveness or finding peace or searching out for happiness. Where does it lie? Where is meaning and hope? Where do they come from in life? And so by asking these questions that all of us maybe wrestle with or struggle with or desire, you can tap into this emotional, connection with your audience, and hopefully, tell stories that they'll relate to. So it's been actually a really interesting journey to see stories from all these different, perspectives from some of the leading storytellers in the world, and saying, it's about caring for your audience. It's about caring for your listeners. You make a contract with them, in a sense, a promise that you're going to deliver on, a certain type of story, whatever genre that might be, and then fulfilling it. So it's been a great journey and very enjoyable and interesting to meet some of these storytellers through the stories that they write and tell and share. Yeah.
And I saw some of the guests you've had are just tremendous, George R.R. Martin and Sandra Brown, and just some who are some others that
we've had Steve Barry's been on. He's an international best-selling author. Jeffrey Deaver, Orson Scott Card just recently was on.
He was your last guest.
Right? He was just on a week or so ago. And then also oral storytellers. I've had some of the leading storytellers in the country, a guy named Ed Stivender, and also Bill Lepp is a sort of a comic storyteller. So Bill was on recently. So Donna Washington's another well-known storyteller that was on the show. So it's been a great honor and privilege to be able to share, and pick the minds of some of these storytellers.
Yeah. So what during the pandemic, and as we're all closed in here, what stories have you been consuming or reading, binging Anything that the listeners should check out?
Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. I wish that I've spent more time binging on stories and less time trying to write some new projects. But I've had a number of projects that had started over the last year that I've been trying to bring to completion. So I've been working like a mad dog over the last few months trying to finish. I have a new novel that I've finished that I'm just doing the edits on. So that book has chomped away at quite a bit of my time. But what have I been watching? Let's see. Well, I actually, some of the shows that I've watched either right before or during the pandemic that I think are some really interesting storytelling. Netflix has a show called Ozark, which I feel like is really some interesting storytelling that's being done. Amazon has a show called Sneaky Pete that also is one that I feel like has just fascinating stories and characterization, lots of twists and turns if you like kind of con game stories. So that's really fun. And then Better Call Saul is a drama. I think that AMC produces that again, it's maybe the fourth season of that. So I've enjoyed over the last several years. These are some of the shows that I've been watching, and just as they develop. What about you? Like, what have you been mainly checking out during these strange days?
Oh man, yeah. I the last thing I watched, I think, was Space Force on Netflix.
Oh yeah, Space Force.
Which was pretty funny, but
I
yeah, a
I
lot of
gotta
movies. I'm more of a movie. I have
yeah
a lot of the series that, if they're only out for a year or two, I don't want to get into them, and then but then sometimes a series is like, oh, it's a huge long series and it's this huge commitment,
yeah no, I hear you.
and so I'm more a movie. I love to be able to sit down, have a cool story, and then that's it. And the limited series are great too, where it's like a 6 to 10 episode or something.
Yeah. Now, this might not surprise you, but it might. We've known each other for a number of years. I'd say probably like 8 or 10 years now over
Yeah,
time. But I've been watching lately the TV show from the '90s called The Outer Limits,
yeah,
and so I don't know if you remember this show or if you've watched
love
it,
love that show. I
yeah,
always thought that there were so many of those ideas and cool little things that
yeah.
maybe the episode was cheesy in one way or another, or there was something that you kind of like, but there was always some element of it that you would watch and just go, oh, that is such a cool idea. That is such
I
a
think so.
cool idea.
I enjoy watching them. So it's kind of for your viewers who aren't familiar with. It's a little bit like the Twilight Zone a bit. Very often deals with science fiction stories, and so it's kind of right up my alley. And I also like that they're standalone episodes, right? You can
Right.
watch it in 45 minutes or an hour, whatever, however long it is. All of a sudden, you're like, all right, that was really an interesting ride. I loved it, or I didn't love it, or whatever, and I can move on, and it's
Yeah.
not so much of a time crunch. So. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And they're
the
so
outer limits, man.
yeah,
That's
I love the
crazy.
outer
Geek out
limits.
on the outer limits.
So to give people an idea, like what kind of stories, I remember there were some. They were always had a cool twist. Like I remember one was you find out he's really been like they've crash landed and some alien spider is like
Mm.
putting dream stuff into his brain. So the whole thing's been a dream. Or I remember there were what was the one with do you remember the one with the hearing thing? She was deaf, and then she got like had something. It was the real
I'm not
famous
sure.
actress who Marley Matlin or Marley, I can't remember her name, but she was a real famous actress that was
Yeah.
who was deaf, and she was in it. There were just a ton of great ones. I could probably sit here and rattle off a dozen
Yeah.
really cool episodes from that.
So I've been watching the outer limits. So it's been fun. I think both of us share this interest in kind of science fictiony kind of stories and themes and stuff like that. And that's one of the reasons. I know we were talking before we were on the air about my latest book, Synapse, but it's a science fiction thriller that came out last year. And the thing with this book is very often people talk about artificial intelligence, and I love science fiction. It deals with these questions stuff. But I thought, what about artificial belief? Like when machines have free will, what will they choose to believe? And how will that affect, society? And so for instance, like just as human beings, some human beings believe in God, some don't. Some believe that there's enough evidence to justify the belief in God. Some say, no, I don't think that there is. So I mean, you have both approaches. Well, when machines get to the same level of reasoning that humans have, the same thing will happen. Some machines will believe that there is no God. Some will naturally believe that there is. They'll look at the same evidence humans say, no, I believe that there's God. So, well, what will happen in society when there are machines or robots that believe in God? Will they want to pray? Will they want to share their beliefs with other people? How will that affect things? So this is a question that actually led to that whole story of Synapse, which is about a robot who starts to ask questions that robots were never intended to ask.
Mm-hmm. So is this, how far in the future are we talking here?
It's 30 years.
30 years.
So now I don't know that in 30 years machines will have free will, sentience, and so on like this, but I had to plant the book solidly somewhere, right? So I was like, let's just say 30 years from now, they have self-awareness, free will, so let's just say that machines can. So some people talk about the singularity as the moment when machines kind of eclipse humans in thought and emotion and so on like this. And so I said, all right, well, let's say not write a book about that, but what happens after that. So once machines have these abilities, then what would happen? And so it's a terrorist thriller. It's a high concept terrorist thriller, but it happens in this world, like I say, 30 years from now, and it deals with some of these questions about artificial belief. So it was a ton of fun to write. It was an idea that I'd had for a couple of years, and I was like, I really want to explore this and see, what the story would look like if Jordan, this machine, starts to ask these questions, and where would that lead? So for me, that's a lot of what coming up with stories is coming up with something intriguing or different. Like what we were just saying, with some of these old episodes of the show, Outer Limits, is like there's this intriguing maybe idea or twist, and then seeing where it'll lead. And that tends to be a lot of where I take my writing in the novels that I explore.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that. I know because you have the one you mentioned there, Synapse. Yeah. Is not part of a series, correct? It's a standalone.
Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's just a standalone. You've also done several. How many books are in the Patrick Bowers series now?
Yeah, there's 11 books in the series with Patrick Bowers. So I started that, I guess, in 2005 or 6. Man, it makes me feel so old now when I look back, and I'm like, every one of those books is like a year of my life, So
I feel you. Yes.
Yeah. And basically what takes a reader an hour to read is about what takes me a month to write. Okay. So I look back and I'm like, okay, there's 11 books. That's like 110 hours worth of, hopefully entertainment value that I've written over the last, 11, 12, 15 years. Now think about it this way. Okay. Are you ready? Think about the Marvel movies. There have been like 4 Marvel movies in the Marvel universe. And even let's say there's 25, and even if every one of them is 3 hours long, which they're not, but 3 hours long, that would be 75 hours of entertainment. Well, 11 books is like 100. So it's like almost twice as, you know what I mean? If the movies were 2 hours long, that'd be like 50 hours. So you're talking about like writing twice as much entertainment as all of the Marvel movies combined. That's crazy. But I mean, you dedicate basically 12 years of your life to it, and that's what you're trying to accomplish. So yeah, it was certainly, now that I look back, if you were to say, okay, by the way, Steve, you're going to have to write 11 of these novels that are each, 400 or 500 pages. I've been like, there's no way. Like, that's crazy. I could never do that. Now, looking back, I'm thankful I had the chance to do it. But really an interesting, series, lots of great characters. And it's been fun to meet readers over the years, the last 15 years, people who've read the books and enjoyed them. It's always an honor, whenever I meet someone, they're like, oh, I grew up reading Patrick Bowers novels or whatever. And so it's pretty neat to be a part of something bigger than yourself and the stories that you tell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very cool. So what's you talk about the fans, you get out there more than most, with speaking events and more than us, we writers are, frail, scared of the sun kind of breed. So, but you get out there with the fans a lot, probably more than most. So what's the craziest fan interaction that comes to mind? What's a funny or crazy story that comes to mind with that you had an interaction with a fan?
I mean, I think of a couple of times where people have come up and they're sort of maybe and just because they think you're famous or something, then they come up and they're intimidated. Like this one lady came up to me one time and she goes, has anyone ever told you how handsome you are? And I was like, no. And she goes, there's a reason for that.
Oh, no.
I don't know if she meant it the way it came out or not, but it was certainly pretty funny. And whenever she said that, so that kind of came to mind, And this lady came up to me one time. She said, you are my biggest fan. And I was like, okay. And she goes, no, you are my biggest fan. And I was like, and I'm glad to finally meet you. It's like, what else do you say? So yeah, it's fun to see people if they grow up and they've read your books, and so it's neat to see. And one of the things I've enjoyed is some, parents have been like, I grew up reading your books. Now I'm passing them on to my niece or my nephew or, whatever. Or I grew up reading your books and now I'm starting to, get your children's stuff for my kids or whatever it might be. And it's always like, well, it's pretty neat to be a part of, people's lives. And, this whole thing of being a storyteller, being an author and stuff, it's like people are entrusting you with a lot of their time and their emotion, and just the fact that they've been satisfied with that is very humbling to say, what, you've spent 100 hours with me, reading my books, and that you've enjoyed that. I mean, that's just, to me, I can't even wrap my mind around that. It's just such an honor to be a part of that, part of someone's life.
So that makes me, as you're describing that, it makes me think of something else. What do you think is the hardest part about being a writer? Because to me, when you're saying that, there's an element of fear and of expectation that comes along with that. So that's personally something that I would find difficult. But what is something that you find to be a difficulty or would be the hardest part or worst part about being a full-time writer?
I find that the way I approach things, I tend to really, really try to write the very best novel that I can before I send it in to my publishers. So some authors like to go back and forth with editors and stuff. Like I'll change this, and the editor says, "Oh, I think you should change this," or whatever. And they go back and forth, and they enjoy that process. For me, I find that when I write a book, I really try to write it the way that I want it to be read and send that in, instead of sending something in that's maybe not my very best, that they go back and forth and change. So I find it difficult once I've sent a book in to have someone say, "Oh, you need to change this part." I'm like, no, actually that's the way it needs to be because that's what I wrote. And if I wanted it differently, I would have written it differently. And so I don't love that. I'll just say over the years, I've had some experiences with some editors who maybe haven't been as skilled as they could be. And so some negative, experiences in that process. Now I've had some good ones, some good experiences as well. But as far as what's the most difficult, it might be that process of saying, okay, look, here's my book. And then trying to work with an editor who maybe isn't on the same page. That can be really frustrating, as far as being an author goes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you ever had the you know, old Hollywood, you know, is notorious for the producers coming in and ruining the film. You know, you ever had that kind of publisher um, interference where they come to you and said, "Hey, for the marketing of this next book, we really want you to go in this direction, or we really want this to change, or anything like that?"
I mean, that's a good question. The only one that actually comes up uh, is a book I wrote, my third novel called The Knight, Knight, like a chess piece, The Knight, a chess piece. And so there's this flashback scene in The Knight where this killer actually remembers killing his grandmother when he was like 11 years old, and he was at home with her, and he was like curious. I wonder what it would be like to kill someone. So he takes this knife and he walks over and he kills his grandmother. And so there's this really shocking scene where this little 11-year-old boy, you know, is watching his grandmother die and bleed to death on the linoleum floor. My publisher's like, can we do this without this flashback scene? Like, you know, because it's pretty shocking and scary, and it's a terrifying scene, really, to me. Even as the writer of it, it terrified me. And I was like, you know what? No, we can't. We really need to include this in this book. And there were actually some bookstores that didn't carry The Knight simply because they didn't want that scene
Wow.
to be in the book. And like, it's not glorifying violence. It's just that you, through this boy's eyes, see what he is doing. And so as far as that goes, it might have sold more books if I had taken that out. But as I guess as the author, I felt like it was necessary to understand what that character was capable of. And yeah. And he's a terrifying bad guy, man. He scared me when I was writing that book. You know, we mentioned this earlier off the air, but you know, I'm a Christian, and so at the time I was writing The Knight, I was writing this book of prayers as well for this publisher. I had to actually stop writing The Knight and finish writing this book of prayers that was published, then come back to The Knight because it troubled me so much writing kind of the darkness of this novel. So it was a very interesting journey, you know, for me. But I needed to step away from this character. He was frightening me. That's how much I kind of got into the book when I was writing it.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. You say that about the kids, and that's a kind of one of the, I'd say is a unwritten rule is, you know, that you don't hurt a kid or a dog. You know, but in a situation like that, I've actually done similar things where you have a flashback of the killer as a child. Yeah. And I've never actually had any pushback of, you know, with that the same way. Now, I have had a situation where I had some kids that were in danger from a killer. Yeah. And you know, spoiler alert, they didn't get killed. So everybody was okay with it. But I had several, that's probably one of the biggest comments I've had about books or about that book was, oh man, if you would have killed those kids, you know, if you would have killed those kids, I would have just put the book down.
Yeah.
But then it was like this whole triumph that they didn't, you know, so it was, you know, I mean, obviously you know, that's what we were going for was the emotional resonance of that. But, you know, I find that interesting that you kind of had that pushback, even as just a flashback of what this kid had done.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's I guess it's a compliment to the scene that it was well written. It was really troubling to read, but yeah, it was just about this boy. And I was thinking of another one of my books, actually, Every Crooked Path. When you just mentioned that about children being in danger, is this book has to do with this group that's targeting children online for sexual exploitation. Now, there isn't anything in the book where I show kids getting abused or anything along those lines. But I dedicated the book to the network for exploited children. I'm trying to remember. NCMEC is the National Center for Exploited and Missing Children, I think is the name of it. Anyway, yeah. So, but I had, because the reality is in our world, you know, kids do go missing. And some kids are exploited in these terrible ways. And so I was like, I'm going to write a book about this. not to celebrate it, not to in any way glorify, this type of thing, but it's like, this is our world. So, but some people had written to me about the book, Every Crooked Path, which I feel like is one of my best written books and maybe my most important book because it deals with this real issue.
Hmm.
But some people had written to me and saying I couldn't finish reading it. I was like, trust me, no kids, you know what I mean? You don't see a kid get, injured or attacked or whatever, but they're like, just the idea that it could happen, I didn't want to think about it. And I was like, guess what? I mean, this is our world.
Right.
And so, in my books, I want to be honest about human nature, but in a way that's sensitive to my readers. And so that was probably one of the biggest challenges, was writing that book in a way that I could do both of those at the same time, where I could be, compassionate to the readers and not lead them where they didn't want to go, but also deal with this issue of our society where people actually do target, children online. And so, that was probably one of the most difficult books to write because I wanted to do both of those things, and it was difficult at the same time to do them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, I'm the same way with my books, trying to take on, whatever topic you want to explore or learn more about, even if it's something sensitive like that. But you mentioned about violence.
Yeah.
And in your books, not to say that they're overly violent or anything, but certainly have when you're dealing with serial killers and things like that, there's going to be a certain amount of death and violence.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you've had, as you said when we introed you, you've written books for Christian kids, storytelling for kids, and then you've written these others. Have you had any kind of blowback, or how has the Christian community embraced your books?
It was interesting when my first novel, The Pawn, came out. Someone wrote to me and said, "Is this a Christian book?" And I was like, it was such, to me, a strange question. Like, what would make a book Christian or non-Christian? I was like, I mean, it certainly is not a sermon. It deals with issues of good and evil. It has violence. It has, in the sense of redemption, a redemptive plot of a character trying to find hope, and so I was like, well, what would make a book unchristian? And then I thought, well, maybe if it has lots of gratuitous sex and violence, maybe idolatry, maybe people, condemning God or taking his name in vain or whatever it might be. And I thought, well, witchcraft and all this. I thought, wait, no, that's the Old Testament in the Bible. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm like, well, it's clearly a Christian, at least Christians consider that a Christian book. So how does that work? And so in my own, experience in my journey, the idea is I want to tell stories that ask big questions that aren't there to get a message across to people, but hopefully help them think about issues that matter in a new way. So my questions do deal with justice, and in some cases, actually questions of morality. Does free will exist? Does God? Does he not? Does it matter? I mean, these are questions that drive some of my stories over the years. What's more important, truth or justice? And what keeps me from becoming like those I hunt is one question that Patrick Bowers asks in the book, The Rook, and is he's hunting these serial killers and so on. And so as a person of faith, my goal is not to preach a sermon when I write a book about Patrick Bowers or another book, but it's to ask big questions in a way that is engaging and that matters. I feel like, how do we approach evil in our stories? Like, do we glamorize evil and make it look attractive? I don't want to do that. Or do we like mute evil and almost pretend like it doesn't exist? That's really not that bad. I don't want to do that either. Because when I look at our world, I see that it's a world of great promise and also great pain. It's a world of great, of glory and love and self-sacrifice, but it's also a world of horror and, so it's both. Like, it's not one or the other. And so I think some people make the mistake to sort of make the world out to be like just follow your dreams and everything will be all right. Like everything will be happy. But, in my, and I'm sure, in your research as well over the years, I've realized, well, serial killers follow their dreams. I mean, so
Yeah.
clearly there's got to be some other, bigger morality at work than just follow your dreams, because if you just follow your dreams, that could lead you astray depending on what the dreams are. So anyway, so I look at it and I'm like, okay, I want to celebrate all in our world that is worth celebrating, and I want people to look at human nature through honest eyes.
Mhm.
And so I want my stories to inspire hope, and ask big questions. Actually, recently I was just interviewing someone for my podcast, The Story Blender, and I had this question come into my mind, and that was, or this saying, I guess, and that was that every story that matters is desperate to be told. And so I thought, that's kind of interesting, right? So as I'm working on my new novel, my new book, I'm asking myself this question: what about this story is desperate to be told? And I think that stories that really make a difference to people in the end are those that have that when we read them, we're like, this story impacts me forever. Well, there was something, I think, in that story that was desperate to be told. I think those are the stories that really leave us changed from then on out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in my experience, people will accept those kinds of big questions and things like that as long as you have it that it's the character's belief and it's
Yeah.
coming from the character, and you have I think, or at least this is my opinion, that people accept that as long as you have um, that other perspective. Sometimes you have a character that will come in and challenge a character's belief
Yeah.
or things like that. It's not just this, like you said, like it's not just a sermon about what you believe or what you want to get out there, or it's really taking these characters and exploring. There have been several times in my books where I have characters who will really go off about their beliefs that I don't share. You know,
Oh yeah.
but,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and so I mean, it's all about exploring the beliefs of different people that inhabit our world, and then putting them into this fake world. To explore that kind of truth. Um,
It's interesting. Like this one guy, over the years, he read a lot of my Patrick Bowers novels, and Tessa, who is one of the characters in the series, right? She's a teenage girl who's kind of a little dark and haunted, but witty and whip smart, and she's kind of this fascinating and haunted girl, but very bright. And so anyway, but she's a vegan. Like she is very much into animal rights. And so this guy kept writing to me. It's like, how come you're promoting veganism or whatever? We should be able to eat meat. I'm like, I'm not promoting anything. Like you can eat meat. I don't care what you eat. This is her view. Like, so she'll always argue with people about the way that animals are treated. And especially like at, I don't know, like pigs or chickens or something like that, she'll be like, well, do you know what they're actually treated like? So she'll go off on these rants, and they're not my rants, they're hers. Like
right.
I mean, I
Yeah,
get it where people are coming from, but it's fascinating because I know of at least 2 people who've become vegans as a result of reading my books
oh wow. Well,
because of her arguments for vegetarianism in the books that I wrote, which I'm like, I'm not trying to espouse anything. It's just that this character, that's honest to her, so I'm going to let her have her way. Um,
yeah.
I think, when it comes to characters, I think one of the big secrets to writing characters that resonate with readers is to cut the leash that we usually have around their neck. So a lot of writers will be like, well, I'm in charge, I'll tell this character to do this. I always look at it and say, what would this character do if I got out of the way? Then I'll let him do it. So if it's the bad guy, you'll see how bad he can become. You'll hear his thoughts, you'll hear his words, whatever. If it's this girl, like for instance, then you'll see where her choices would lead her naturally. So again, stories, I don't think it's about sort of beating some sort of message into people's head. I think it's about being honest to the characters, honest to their struggles, and letting them ask questions that explore questions that, you know, matter. And so because of that, I never start my books with a symbol or theme or image that I'm trying to get across. Like I don't start with a theme statement that I want to get across to readers. Instead, I almost always start with a dilemma or a question that I don't know the answer to. And then as I write the story, hopefully I can invite readers into the question as well and allow them to see where it leads. So yeah, it's just, it's, I believe there is good in the world. I believe there's evil in the world. And I know where I want people to gravitate. So I'm going to write books that hopefully ask questions that lead them toward the path of identifying evil and pursuing what is good or right in their lives and in their hearts.
Yeah. Well, but I think what we often find is that it's a lot grayer than that. You know,
Mm.
the evil, you know, yes, there's definitely evil that exists and evil that people do and things, but even those characters are, you know, capable of, well, I don't know how familiar you are with my series, but you know, my is a perfect example of like a character getting out of control and taking on a life of its own, because in my first of the series, The Shepherd, Ackerman was the villain
Mm.
and was I tried to kill him multiple times in that book, you know, and he wouldn't die, and so then he lives on, and all of a sudden he's now it is we just recently resold the bought back the first three books, and they're releasing all of the books in
Mm.
the UK under a different publisher, and I was part of the Penguin Random House merger thing.
Oh, okay, sure.
Lost my editor and all this, but anyway, so we bought the rights back to that, and now we're releasing those. Well, it's not the Shepherd series, it's, they're saying that the Ackerman thrillers,
Hmm.
you know, because he is now the number one, you know, a character who is really, and a character that I think people hated so much to begin with, and now have, you know, gravitated towards. It's really kind of a strange journey that I hope people have taken with him. But I think that's, you know, he gets to explore a lot of what you're talking about with these kind of questions about right and wrong and good and evil and what his nature is.
Yeah, you know, it's like in my books, I don't like to typically have like a character who's all good or all bad. I don't like, because I don't think that's how real life is. Like
Right.
all of us have, you know, for the most part, some qualities that are positive and some that are not so great. And so to create characters that readers can identify with, it's not to me about portraying anyone as flawless, but you know, honest about their flaws, and then you know, seeing where they lead. So yeah, developing characters that resonate with readers is has been something I've thought a lot about over the last few years, because it used to be that people would say you need to create likable characters, and I get where they're coming from, because readers need to like being in your story, or that you know what I mean, like they need to want to spend time. But there are so many characters that I really love reading about that I really don't like the character that much.
Hmm.
So instead, I've started to try to say, how can you make this character irresistible? Not necessarily likable, but irresistible. So that readers will say, yeah, I want to spend 10 hours alone with that character because they're so intriguing or frightening or compassionate or whatever it is. And so, you know, what are some traits that people have that attract us or that engage us? And then making sure that our characters have, you know, some of those traits that really are intriguing and enthralling to readers. So yeah, I've stepped away from this whole idea of make your character likable. You know, I'm like, okay, I get where people are coming from, but I want something different than that. I want irresistible.
Well, yeah, I think in my experience, that's making them likable means or what you would think of making them likable, you know, or what people, the idea that they would have of that,
Yeah.
really makes it to where people don't like them. If you have a character like that, it's usually the characters, you know, in my experience, and I think this is, you know, it's more those characters that are kind of authentic, and you know, they're a lot of times they're not likable at
Hmm.
all, and yet you know, you gravitate toward them because of the authenticity of the honesty
Hmm.
of that character, or you know what, just that they were are kind of have that larger than life kind of thing. You know, they say things and do things differently than what we experience in everyday life, you know. So we talked a lot about writing and went through a lot of these things. What are some what would you say are some of your biggest pet peeves that you find in fiction? uh,
Okay, so let's see here. Pet peeves in fiction. Well, let's so descriptions can be a pet peeve of mine, where people typically do a description where it's like eyes, hair, cheekbones, jaw. Eyes, hair, cheekbones, jaw. When you meet a character, the first thing you hear is what color her eyes are, what color her hair is, and if she's a female, you know, character, she's going to have high cheekbones. Always high cheekbones, never low cheekbones in fiction. Like you'll never be reading about a character in fiction and say she walked in and she had lovely low cheekbones. It's just not something you find. And men will always have like a strong jaw or a lantern jaw, which I don't know what that means. Maybe he has a goatee like you do and he lit it on fire, but they have he has a strong jaw and she has high cheekbones. It's like these cliches just kill me. And eyebrows doing, yeah, like when they waggle their eyebrows and their eyebrows dip and dive and lift and ferment, or I don't know what their eyebrows do, but I tell my writers in my classes, I'll give you one eyebrow reference for every 100,000 words. You can mention one thing about an eyebrow, but otherwise get rid of the eyebrows. So aspiring writers tend to do a lot with eyes, hair, and eyebrows, or yeah, eyes, hair, and eyebrows. And the other thing that sort of bothers me is like cliched openings to stories. So like a lot of stories, it seems like start with the point of view character getting killed off, and so in thrillers, this seems to happen quite a bit. Like a lot of times, a book will start and the main character will just get killed off in the first opening chapter or whatever like that. But I prefer like stories where there's a twist where you think that one thing is going to happen, but actually the rug gets pulled out and something different, happens. So maybe it looks like it's going to be that way, but then the rug is pulled out. So I'm a huge believer in the twist, the plot pivot, where things are going one way and readers are like, I know exactly where this is going. Boom. Let that expectation actually lead them down one way and then flip and turn and go back another way with a twist. So I hate stories that are too unexpected and also ones that are too predictable. So it's sort of like two sides of the same coin. Like one is like you're reading it like, where does that come from? Like that makes no sense. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get it now. That was for the big twist setup or whatever. I don't like that. But I also don't like it when they're so predictable. You're like, I know exactly where this is going. Guess what? 200 pages later, that's exactly where it went.
Yeah.
So as writers, it's like we have this strange game that we're playing with readers where they want to guess how a book will end or how it will get to the end, but they want to be wrong. Okay? It's like they want to say, oh, I think I know who the killer is. Okay, I think I know where this is going. I think I know how the lovers are going to get together or whatever at the end. And then suddenly, if it goes there, they'll be like, come on, I saw that coming 200 pages ago. So they don't want to be right.
Right.
But they want to be satisfied. So it's playing with these expectations, I think, when we write that can be really, fun to do and interesting. And so always keeping those in mind, as we write. What are readers expecting, hoping for, wondering about, worrying about here in this scene, and how will that affect, the direction of the story?
So do you you talk about keeping your ideal writer or ideal reader in mind.
Yeah.
That do you read reviews? Do you online, Amazon reviews and all that kind of stuff? Or you?
No, I don't do that at all, actually. Like, I don't read reviews of my books at all because it'll only just upset me if I read them. Because if they say, "Oh, this was a good book," I'm like, "Oh, good, I'm worth something." If they're like, "This book sucked because of this," and I'm like, "Oh no, I suck, I'm terrible," and so I'm just too pathetic that way. So it doesn't do me any good to read the reviews either, because the thing is, it's like once the book's out there, what am I going to do? Like, it is what it is, and so if people like it, they like. If they don't, they don't. But instead, I try to just imagine, in my own mind, what would the reader be experiencing here in this story at this moment? What would they naturally be thinking about or looking forward to? And then I just do my best to try and step into their mindset. I mean, it's clearly, I don't know exactly what it could be, but it's imagination of trying to step into the mind of the reader. And then, one of my goals is always give readers what they want or something better. So if I come to a point in a story, I'm like, you know what, readers just don't want it to go there. I'm like, okay, I can't go there because that's unless it's better than it would normally. But there have been times where I've been, writing a book, and all of a sudden I'm like, you know what, readers just don't want to go there. So I'm like, all right, we'll go a different direction.
Yeah. So do you like you've done series, you've done standalones. What would you prefer? Do you like the kind of structure of the series, or does that feel constrictive, or what? Which do you prefer?
I mean, that's a good question. For me personally, I like telling big stories. So I like telling stories that can span more than one book, because they can be, more characters, more complexity to them, and so on like that. So I would say that I would probably enjoy writing series more. Also, once I get to know the characters really well, then I'm like, okay, now I want to spend more time with this character, right? Like I want to see what else might happen with this character. So, so right now, yeah, I've launched into a new espionage series that I'm working on, and I anticipate it'll be a trilogy, I think. So who knows? But it's as I've been writing it, I've been thinking forward to writing more books in this series, not just introducing the characters now. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if that goes in that direction or not.
So an espionage book, is this another near future kind of thing, or is this
It's
going back?
contemporary. I mean, it's not during the coronavirus or whatever. Like it's a couple of years in the future, but basically contemporary spy story. So I'm pretty excited about it. I've never really done this exact type of story before. So for me as a writer too, I like to stretch myself and try different things. Like if I'll only do the same exact thing, then I feel like I can get into a rut. I don't want that to happen. So personally, I've done the 11 books with Patrick Bowers. I did a young adult sort of paranormal series a couple of years ago called Blur, Fury and Curse, the Blur series for teenagers. And then I did this science fiction one. Now this one's going to be a little more action, intrigue, and espionage. So who knows where I'll go after this? I have another idea for another young adult novel that I'd like to write in a very different way, like writing this novel not as prose but as poetry. Like to write a whole novel as poetry is
Wow.
something that I'd like to explore too. So as a personally, I find that if I do the same thing too long, though, I get, like I say, cookie cutter. I don't want to go there, so I'm going to continue to explore. And sometimes, you fall on your face. You do something, and you're like, "Ah, it didn't work." Oh well, get up, brush yourself off, go after it the next time. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, well, and that's great. That's a great attitude to have.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Well, yeah, that positivity. You know, I think that's something that you definitely have to develop the thick skin as a
Uh,
writer coming into that. So, do you have what would be the advice? We've talked a lot about writing um, in general and things like that, but what specifically would you say to a starting out aspiring author today? What kind of advice would you give them about getting published, about writing a book, whatever you want to
Yeah,
add?
I mean, a couple things do pop to mind. Number one, in our world today, it's very easy to get published. You could self-publish your book in an hour, and you could have your book up online to be selling it. And so, because of that, a lot of books are being published now way too early. Okay. I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong with self-publishing. I'm not necessarily for it or against it. I'm for good stories. That's what I'm for. So however they're published, I don't really care. But what happens is that a lot of people are like, well, I've got this book, I write this book, and then I sent it out one time, it got rejected, so I think I'll just self-publish it. Well, it probably got rejected for a reason, and that reason is probably that it wasn't ready to be published. So simply self-publishing it is not going to make it ready to be published. It's still going to be not quite ready to be published. So I feel like a lot of books are being published before they're ready. So I would say if you're planning to self-publish, then that's a format that you can use today. It's very available and capable to use it. But make sure that the book is worth reading. Make sure that the writing is it's the best that you have. You know, there are like 5,000 self-published books that come out per day, plus all of the traditional published books that come out every year. So, I mean, you're literally talking millions and millions of books being published every single year. And it's just that there's so many of them that aren't really ready yet. So I think we could use, everybody take a step back, take a big breath, be like, all right, how can I write this book the best possible way? Take it to a level of excellence that maybe you hadn't even imagined before you go ahead and publish the book.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that, what a lot of people don't realize, we say self-publishing, but what that means is, okay, you're going to publish a book, but you're going to do it yourself. Obviously what the word means, but people don't realize that, okay, that means that you have to do everything that a publisher does.
Yeah.
Or if you want to do it, well, then you have to do everything that a publisher does. You have to have a copy editor. You have to have it, it's not this just self-publishing means clicking a button on Amazon to a lot of people. And really anyone out there who is doing this well is taking it seriously as if they're their own business and they're their own publisher, and hiring out wherever they need to, or taking the time to do that work that a publisher would do for them.
Yeah, I mean, some people have asked me, if they should self-publish or not, and I'm like, really, that's your choice. But the question to ask is not so much should you self-publish, but do you want to self-market? Because if you do self-publish, like you just mentioned, you're doing all the jobs. Well, one of those jobs is marketing. So, do you want to spend 20 hours a week marketing your book? If you do, maybe that's a great fit for you. Maybe it's perfect. But if you don't, if you're like, no, look, I want to write stories. Like I'm a storyteller. I'm not a story seller. I'm not a salesman. I'm not a marketer. I'm a storyteller, right? Then it might not be the best fit for you personally. Maybe a traditional publisher would be a better fit. So, the big thing for me is like seek quality, to write worthy books, write books that matter. And then, that's for me kind of the goal, and that's what I would encourage aspiring writers to say is like, take less time. Maybe it'll take longer, to get published and stuff, but let's let our stories elevate instead of, maybe be mediocre. In fact, in my office, I actually have a sign that says "Rage Against Mediocrity." It's over on the filing cabinet. And so every time, I come in my office, I see "Rage Against Mediocrity." And then this other sign I'm looking at right now on the wall says, "Why not be brilliant?" And so these are what, to me personally, I say, okay, look, I want to write, why not be brilliant? Like I can write a better story. So I'm going to shoot for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, I have enjoyed all your stories that I've read. So,
well, thank you.
I would highly recommend and do highly recommend your books to people. So that'll take us to the end of our time here today. But it has really been a pleasure speaking with you as always, Steve. And hopefully we will in the near future be getting back to our usual hangouts at Thriller Fest and getting 99-cent pizza and all that kind of stuff.
I certainly hope so. That's been our tradition over the years, hasn't it been? At midnight at Thriller Fest, we leave the conference and go and get 99-cent slice of pizza up in New York City. So I hope that does come soon.
And we have the 666 building right across the road. I think you and I are the only ones that ever noticed that. So.
Oh my goodness, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So,
and it doesn't say anything else. It just has big 666 on the thing.
Yeah,
What?
I know that's a little troubling. So what happened there? So
hopefully we'll be getting back to that before too long, and getting back to some kind of a.
I hope so. So yeah, and all of your viewers, listeners are welcome to check out the story. The Story Blender podcast. Also, they're welcome to check out my books at stephenjames.net. That's where all my books are, and everything Stephen James is found there. And read Stephen James. You can follow me on Twitter, and I always try to engage with people. If they write to me, I'll do my best to write you back as promptly as possible. So you guys take care and enjoy and keep up the good work.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us here today, and I look forward to speaking to you here in the future.